What I wanted to do in this one is kind of break the flow of these kind of historical, political analysis and get a bit more personal maybe, and tell my experience, our experience, working with the Israeli army over the last number of years, because it has, your experiences shape the way that you view the world, the way that you view politics, the way that you view everything, what you go through, what you experience, what you see, what you taste, what you feel, what you know, shapes it. And for me, working with the Israeli army was an incredible, I can't see the situation in Gaza without being influenced by what I've experienced, and what I've experienced in other parts of the Middle East, particularly in war zones where the issue of Jihad is front and center, which it is in the situation of Gaza as well. So I'm going to just share a bit of the story. Some of you may be familiar with it. There's a lot of new people interacting with these videos that I don't know, so you may not know the story, so I thought it might be valuable too. Also would recommend, we've put out about 10 or 11 feature films over the last number of years, and one of them in particular focuses on our work with the Israeli army in not the whole film, but part of it. And the film's called The Frontier. It's available on our app, the FAI app, and it's also available on YouTube for free. It's called The Frontier. It's actually one of my favorite films that we've produced. So the backstory, my family and I were living in Iraqi Kurdistan, up on the triangle border of Iran, Turkey, and Iraq during the ISIS years. We were working with the Kurds. We were providing kind of a two-pronged thing. We were providing combat medical care for the Peshmerga soldiers, and then we were providing care for civilians in liberated areas when the Peshmerga would liberate an area from ISIS control. So we were doing that, and I get a call from a friend, and actually an Iranian friend, who's leading a massive movement of former Muslims inside of Iran who have become followers of Jesus, who love Israel, whose lives have been transformed, a massive movement. We have a film about that as well. If you haven't seen it, Sheep Among Wolves 2 is also available for free on all those platforms. So I get a call from my friend, and he says, hey, long story short, he had a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend who knew an army officer here in Israel. I'm going to cut out all the details and make it short. I came to Israel to meet with him. He's now like family and a brother to me. Marco Moreno, at the time he had just retired. He was the head of an intelligence unit that was responsible for building the architecture, which later became known as the Good Neighborhood Unit, which is a unit in the Israeli Defense Force that provided aid to the Syrians during the worst parts of the Syrian civil war, right up until Assad took full control of the south. Our teams, once that ended, our teams came out. But after the meeting, that's actually how I came to Israel. I met Marco, and we stayed. We just never left. We went back a couple months later and packed up our house in Iraq, put it into a shipping container, left it there. It's still there to this day, being pillaged by our teams in Iraq from time to time, which is great. And we got to work in Syria, here on the Israeli side. So every night for a number of years, I was with the IDF in different capacities, on the border, at the bases, interacting with officers, interacting with young soldiers. We had a lot of interaction with the army over those years. What we were doing was sending medical professionals inside Syria to provide medical care for families and villages inside Syria. So we established a lot of it was combat care, because Assad was just, what he did was just drop barrel bombs on villages, and it would just decimate the villages and rip families apart. And so we put medical teams in, physicians and doctors and paramedics, but we really focused on families. So we established a birth clinic, but every single night, except for Friday nights and Shabbat, but even then sometimes, every single night, the Israeli army was sending in aid in massive military operations that cost billions of dollars to support Arab Sunni Muslims inside Syria who were being bombarded by the Assad regime and he was trying to crush out the resistance to his regime and his dictatorship. Now, I came into it pretty cynical, going, okay, look, the Israelis are providing humanitarian aid, but it's got to be just an intelligence op. It's just got to be, my assumption here is that the Mossad is, this is mostly an intelligence thing. We're probably going to run into a lot of Mossad, CIA. It's going to be spooky. It's going to be very spook operation. And when I got into it, I realized, man, this is for sure an intelligence operation. For example, the proof of chemical weapons that were provided to the Obama administration of Assad's use of chemical weapons was provided by Sunni communities here in the Golan Heights on the Syrian side who provided the proof of it and actually brought the proof over to this side and then got it to the Obama administration, which was supposed to be his red line. He didn't do anything about it and did nothing, and Assad continues to use chemical weapons against his own people. So every night, our teams were living inside Syria. So we would do these covert operations at night to push them inside Syria, and then they would basically serve under the leadership of local communities all along the Syrian Israeli border, from Mount Hermon down to the Jordanian border. And then Assad took control and defeated the opposition and disarmed them, neutralized them, and at that point we were forced out of Syria. So that was our experience there. Since then, we've continued to work with the Israeli army in a number of humanitarian ways. There's been, every year there's something happening here in Israel. So we're always doing things that I'm really doing initiatives that I'm really proud of, things that I'm proud in the Lord, not arrogant of, proud in the Lord. Like, I'm grateful that we got to be a part of that. When the COVID crisis hit, we coordinated with the Israeli army to provide medicine and food to communities, at-risk communities who couldn't get out at the beginning of the conflict, at the beginning of the COVID crisis. And so we were all over the north of Israel providing food and this and that. We worked with the hospitals. I mean, the list goes on of things that we were able to do over the years here in Israel because of our relationship with the army. And Marco served 25 years in the army. Marco's the director of the Israel division of FAI here in Israel. Marco was the former head director of his intelligence unit, which was a unit of intelligence that serves in the army. So it's like the Mossad. The Mossad's like the CIA in the United States. The unit that Marco served in is not Mossad. It's an intelligence unit within the Israeli army itself. And so because of my relationship with Marco and seeing, and this is the thing that really shaped me, seeing the lengths to which Marco went to build this massive project. It became a unit in the army. There was a base that they ended up carving out this massive area to form this unit that had officers, that had soldiers, that had transportation guys, that had communications guys, had security guys. And it was operating to serve one purpose alone, to provide humanitarian aid to Arab Muslims in Syria. Now, the cynical among us will say, yeah, but they were just doing it to use them so that they could, alter the war, or that they could, use them and discard them and abuse them. Well, you can believe what you want, but I was there every night watching this, night after night, watching as Israeli soldiers with tears in their eyes, hugging and embracing Syrians on the other side, because the Syrians were coming with such gratitude because they knew that they were only alive because the Israelis were providing food and water and sugar and fuel and medicine and doctors. They were evacuating the sick and wounded. They were taking care of the children. It was unbelievable what they did. Now, I do believe, the army got into it for cynical reasons, just, to do what the army's supposed to do, which is to secure the border. That's what they did. They reached out to the other side and said, hey guys, look, if this fighting spills over into Israel, we're going to have to occupy you guys and it's going to suck for everybody. So can we make an agreement here to be good neighbors? And that's where the term came from, good neighbors. And through that, mutual respect grew between the Israeli army and Sunni Syrian community, Arab community in Syria. Now, why does that influence my thinking about the Gaza conflict? For a number of reasons. One, because working with the army, I can't look at the Israeli army as these blood-sucking, sinister colonialists, apartheid-bent demons wrapped in army outfits who are just mercilessly tormenting the Palestinians and just shooting kids and doing airstrikes on women. That's just not who the Israeli Defense Force are. The Israeli Defense Force defends Israeli citizens. That's their job. That's who they are. That's what they do. So I can't. You can believe that if you want, but I mean, I'm not a naive guy. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm not a naive guy. And I'm a very cynical guy. I've worked in war zones all over the Middle East. I've seen the worst of the worst in terms of military corruption and the abuse and use of military power to oppress and to harm and to hurt vulnerable people. I can tell you with a high degree of confidence that I'm proud to work with the Israeli Defense Force in a humanitarian capacity. I'm just so honored to do so, and watching how honorable they were in the process. People are like, oh, how do you know they're not using you? And I never once felt used by the Israeli army. We collaborated on a beautiful project to save thousands of lives, literally to save lives by evacuating the wounded and sick into Israel. We were able to birth babies. We were able to resuscitate people who were killed in bombings. We were able to, it was just an incredible experience. So when someone comes along and says, the Israelis hate Arabs, I go, you don't know anything of what you're talking about. So that really shaped my experience. And when it comes to Gaza, here's an important point. What we've seen, I mentioned this in other videos, what we've learned from Israel is that Israel loves having thriving relationships of mutual respect with Arabs. They actually really love it. Israelis love having mutually respectful, affectionate, warm relationships with Arabs, with Arab countries, with Arab leaders, with the Arab world. They want that. So it's not in their interest to have this ongoing clashes with the Palestinians. The ongoing clash is over the issue of jihad. That's the issue. Meaning, the Israeli army isn't they don't wake up in the morning and go, okay, everybody, let's sit around and have a strategic meeting about how we can torment the Palestinians. They're sitting around saying, how can we defend the country? How can we defend the country? And how can we stave off this rising tide of jihad that just won't seem to go away? Because we can't kill it out of them. You can't fight jihad out of people. It has to be both the hammer and the carrot, so to speak, meaning you have to drop the hammer as the military. The role of FAI is not to drop a hammer on the Palestinians who are bent on jihad, which most Palestinians are not, by the way. Like most Syrians, do not support all this craziness that Assad and all the Sunni radical groups. Most of the Syrian community are very moderated, brilliant, humble, warm, lovely people. And the same is true of Palestinians. Palestinians in general are lovely people. They're warm, they're respectful, they love Israel, they don't hate the Jews. The issue is there's a cancer inside Syrian society, like there's a cancer in Syrian society. The cancer that's inside Palestinian society is the issue of jihad. And as long as that tumor is growing and metastasizing, there's just going to be death all around. It's just going to produce death. So this is not, a definitive argument as to, 50 reasons why, the Israeli army is not an apartheid machine. But, for what it's worth, I just want to say, as a guy who lives here in Israel, who's worked in most of the consequential big battle zones in the Middle East, and who's worked with a lot of militaries, who's worked with a lot of vulnerable at-risk people, who's worked up close and personal with jihad and genocide, interacting with the dynamics of all that comes with that.